Welcome to another episode of Moral Injury International. I'm Marty here in Melbourne, and we're going to cross over shortly to my friends, my colleague and friend Leo Quinlan, who's going to host this, and then speaking to retired Irish Army officer is Ray Lane. Ray has written the book Only a Soldier Knows, and for people that know me, you would have seen him on my life stories. But this is a little more deep and digging into the after effects. Now, I must put a trigger warning on this, is that if anything affects you that we're going to be talking about, please switch off and get professional help. But let's cross over now to my friends in Ireland. Leo, yes, we have Ray Lane, and I'm going to cross over to you to start the interview, because considering you two guys, we have a lot in common, but you two guys are Irish retired officers. So can you kick off? And first of all, if you don't mind me asking you, Leo, for our listeners that don't know it, can you start out by explaining what is moral injury?
Okay, thanks, Marty. Hello, Ray. Nice to be with you today. And thanks indeed for coming on this podcast. Let's just kick off with moral injury. We started this moral injury Marty and I were talking about it recently, about 4.5 years ago. And the word moral injury was made known to me through the U.S. Army War College and the U.S. Army War Veterans. And they were talking about the siege of Jadotville, and they made the point that Jadotville is a perfect example of collective moral injury. And that's where we started. Okay, so for the viewers and listeners, in layman terms, what we consider moral injury to be, and it's in a military context now, and we're all military here today. So moral injury from a military point of view is where soldiers have suffered some traumatic experience and are then betrayed by higher authority. This is the story of Jadotville. This is the story also of the prison service, people in the public sector, in the nursing service, in the Gardaí, in police forces around the world. And we have interviewed people from many places over the last 4 years and many sectors. So the side effects that we see in layman terms of moral injury, and we've kind of clarified all this and so on with veterans of Jadotville and veterans of other sectors as well. They go silent. This is the single biggest side effect. They don't talk about it maybe until something prompts them, like the film of Jadotville, or people listening to talks about Jadotville, or newspaper reports, or near the end of their lives, and they start talking about it. So silence is the big thing. Then you have difficulty with personal relationships, broken marriages, alcoholism, uh, constant nervousness, sitting down in the back garden on their own, smoking in the shed for hours and not talking to the family, and depression and unfortunately suicide. And in the case of Jadotville, we can talk intimately about two people, young men who committed suicide. We've got the family permission to do that, but we know there are five and maybe more that took their own lives from Jadotville. So that's where we're coming from. Now, today, Ray, it's a kind of a military thing because you and I are, as Marty said, we're retired Irish Army officers. Marty is almost in the army. We kind of adopt him into the army a bit because he was born and raised in the Curragh, and his dad was in the army. And the common factor that Marty and I have is that we're both sons of two soldiers who fought in the siege of Jadotville, and that's how we got together in the first place. So, your experience, Ray, from what I know, you must have something to tell us about moral injury, maybe in relation to yourself or other people, or other incidents that you're aware of. So for now, for maybe the next 40 minutes or so, we're throwing it over to you, and let's tell us whatever you want within the context I've described, or otherwise, if you think you need to. And we'll try not to interrupt you, but if we have to say something, we might raise our hand and stop you a little bit. So, Ray, over to you.
Yeah, Leo, it's a pleasure to be on this podcast with yourself and Marty. I was on the podcast a couple of weeks ago with Marty, and I really enjoyed it. So much so, when I was outside, my wife actually looked at me and said, "I think you actually enjoyed that for once, did you?" And I said, "Absolutely, it was super." And Marty's brilliant at what he does. Moral
Thank you,
injury. I
Ray.
actually went to the trouble, Leo, of actually looking this up before this podcast, just to, so I would clear my mind about what, and the word you mentioned there, betrayal. It's something, I mean, no man that serves his country in any capacity, in any walk, should be betrayed. However, we now live in a society where politics really have taken over a lot of things. And at the higher levels of these organizations, we find a lot of politicians as opposed to real leaders. So I suppose from my perspective, the first thing that jumps out at me when you ask me that question is that back in '89 in Lebanon, when we lost, tragically, 3 Irish soldiers in an improvised explosive device attack. And I bear some of the I feel I bear some of the responsibility for that, even to this day, because I had witnessed something a number of weeks beforehand, which indicated that there was an attack on Irish bat about to happen, the Irish battalion about to happen. And I drew up a very comprehensive report on it, and I sent it to the battalion commander, and he read it, and he called in all his key staff officers. And basically, he went around the table asking his staff officers, had I really credibility to write a letter like this? And I was a young acting commandant, and the people that mattered in the room, and I'll name Jim Martell as one of them, outstanding people. Jim Sanderson, outstanding people, supported the letter I wrote. But unfortunately, a couple of politicians on the other side said, well done, acting commandant Lane. However, we don't think you have the experience or the right to put pen to paper in that fashion. So my letter was disregarded. 4 weeks later, I'm in the officers' mess having a coffee, and over in the distance I see black smoke rising over C Company area. And then all hell broke loose, and I went out to find not a sight that anybody wants to see anywhere, but particularly your own soldiers. And I stayed out there for maybe 4 days before I came back to the headquarters, because I just wasn't right in the head at that stage. So I arrived back eventually, and Jim Martell came into my room with a bottle of whiskey and told me to cool down and gave me a couple of glasses, and we relaxed. And the chief of staff then came out, and I was sent to Nakura to do a weapons inspection. so I wouldn't meet the chief. So the chief arrived out. The first question he asked is, "Where's Commandant Lane?" And Martell said, he's doing a weapons inspection in Nakura. Get him up here. So I came up, I briefed the chief, and I produced my letter that I had presented to the battalion commander a number of weeks before. And he looked at the battalion commander, he looked at the ops, and he said, I wasn't appraised of this letter. And the battalion commander said, no, we didn't send it back to Ireland. And at that stage, we were all asked to leave the room, and he stayed in there himself with the battalion commander, but we could hear what was going on outside. So why do I feel I actually betrayed, in one way, those 3 Irish soldiers? I feel that episode in that room, when he was reading out that letter, I should not have taken no for an answer. I should not.
And Ray, do you mind if I just go back a tiny bit there? Is you used the words that you didn't feel quite right.
Yeah.
What was that? Why did you not feel quite right?
Marty, when 3 Irish guys killed, and you feel that you could have done something that I should have done. I mean, I was so angry with myself, and I was angry with the system. I was angry with my battalion commander. I was angry with the people who played me down because I was an acting commandant. And then the result is that we have 3 good soldiers who were killed, and their families are left, with nobody. It was horrendous. So I feel, and to this day, I think I say it in the book, I feel that I should not have taken no for an answer on that particular day. And if you're talking about being insubordinate, no, I'm not talking about insubordination. I'm talking about speaking out the way I would now. I learned so much that particular day that has steered me throughout my career. And I mean, I talk about in the book about standing up to an American four-star general in Afghanistan. That comes from that day in Lebanon. That comes from that day in Lebanon. I mean, I should have done more to convince my boss that he was wrong and that what's on that paper needs to be enacted to preserve the lives of our soldiers. So that was it. And then the trip is over and all, and I come home then, and I really needed some sort of I needed like Bosnia, I needed to see somebody, but I didn't. But anyway, years later then, the army legal officer rings me and he says, Ray, you're the last remaining officer of that particular 64th Infantry Battalion. And you know the three guys that died in your time? I said, yeah, I'll never forget it. Well, he said, one of those soldiers' wives has been fighting a case against the state for the last 13 years, trying to prove that the military were culpable in what happened out there, and that her husband shouldn't have died. And I said to him, what are you talking about? He said, Ray, you do know that this court case is being... I said, I don't know about a court case. I have no knowledge of what you're talking about. And let me tell you something, we were culpable. Well, he says, can you come up to the forecourt? Because the case is about to resume tomorrow and we're having a pre-court meeting this afternoon. So I arrived up with my file, with my photographs of the incident, my report that the battalion commander hadn't passed on. And around the table were some senior, very senior army officers, military officers, senior people from the Department of Defence, the barrister for the Defence Forces and the DOD. And basically I sat there and I was ignored. And then finally, I did what I should have done all those years ago, and I put my fist on the table. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, and you need to listen to me carefully. In relation to this lady's case about culpability, we are. And please put me in the stand so I can prove it. And then I opened my file and I took out pictures of the incident. And I said, this is what you're talking about in broad stroke terms. This is the reality of what happened on the ground that day and what this woman has been putting up with for the last 13 years. Put me on the stand. At that stage, the Assistant Secretary General, Department of Defence, Kieran Murphy, left the room and actually rang the Secretary, Department of Defence, who then rang the lady in question and said that they weren't going to continue the fight against her. And Shatter then put together the Callanan report into the incident. And he's a senior counsel. He came down to me in the Curragh. He didn't drive, so he came and he stayed in Kildare, and we brought him into the school every day. And we enacted in detail what happened on that particular day. And after about 5 days down there, he looked at me, Ray, and he said, what is going on here? The military are culpable. What's the cover up about? So as part of the report, we tried to get all the paperwork over the previous 13, 14 years, including an interim report prepared by the Assistant Secretary General of Defence, supported by Jim Shreenan, who seems to be coming up here a lot. And I don't think they meant it. I hope they didn't. But why would you ask two people not qualified to write a report on an incident like that and come up with findings that they came up with? Because it was outrageous. So, as I say, that incident, it's still with me today. The Callanan report is never too far from me. I read it now and then. And when Private Rooney, for example, his case, I suggested to his legal team that they read the Callanan report and would give them some idea of the way an organisation like the Defence Forces at that level and the Department of Defence might operate. Now, I just want to make the point that in a lot of this, it isn't deliberate attempt to hide the truth. Initially it is, but after a number of years, it just becomes a pain in the neck and they just want to get it out of the way instead of sitting down and being forensic, and that's the word, being forensic in their analysis of what happened. And if we made a mistake, and if we were wrong, put our hands up and say, we were wrong.
Yeah.
Tell the people who've lost or had injured, tell them we were wrong. That lady had to go to 30, and Leo, you know it from your own experience. That woman had to go through 13 years of turmoil to get justice. And, I know my wife has listened to this podcast in the kitchen because to this day, my wife I actually doesn't believe that I didn't know that there was a court case going on for those 13 years. Because she said to me, I can't believe you didn't know, Ray. I can't believe it. And I still think there's a doubt about that. But I actually did not know until I got that phone call from the Army legal officer.
Ray,
yes,
if I may, you said something there that we're jumping a little bit to our own situation, the Jadwal one, when we're chasing, let's say, justice for Jadwal, for the want of a better expression. One senior officer in the Army, who's still in the Army, he told me on the phone one day, he says, Leo, don't confuse malice with incompetence.
Yeah.
A very good phrase, and you've triggered this in my mind because you're almost saying the same thing. In the initial writing of the report, initial action by the Army, there was a lot of malice, covering up, etc. But then as time went on, after that, it became pure incompetence. Documentation missing, people not told this, missing deadlines, etc., etc., etc. So sorry, it seems to be a common trend.
It is a common trend, and just because you're a general doesn't mean you're an expert in everything. Right. So if you're going to put a board of inquiry together, put people on the board who know their subject matter. Okay, you can be the general, but have somebody on that can advise you and tell you the difference between a landmine and an improvised explosive device, for example. A simple little thing like that. So in the interim report, by the way, we had terrible trouble getting that interim report from the Department of Defence, and that wasn't an accident. But I always remember Callanan, highly, so sharp, and he didn't know a whole lot about the Defence Forces, but as those 2 weeks went over, he was absolutely shocked that it had come to that. He couldn't believe it. And as I said, the last page he was asked 4 significant questions he had to answer. The report goes to 100 odd pages, but his answer: were the Defence Forces culpable? Yes. Would these soldiers be alive today if correct procedures had been in place? Answer: yes. Now, that is significant. Does it take 13 years? Should it take 13 years for the loved ones of those fallen heroes to get that answer? I ask myself.
Ray, 13 years compared to what we're going through, and others. It goes on to 30 years, 40 years, 60 years. It's quite crazy, actually. But look, we're talking about moral injury now. I can see, and Marty, I'm sure, can see how that particular incident has affected you. Okay,
again,
and you can talk
Leo, if I just may jump in, but let you continue, you're correct, because that was my next thing, is just listen about Sean Rooney and that, how you carried guilt, yet it wasn't your guilt to carry. And that's what I admire. But sorry, Leo, go ahead. I just need to throw that in because that was on my mind.
It's okay. You can see, Ray, that Marty is well switched on to all of this moral injury business, but that's another story for another time. Thanks, Marty, because we triggered things off each other. Marty and I have been doing it for the last 4 years. But Ray, going on to moral injury, you've described one incident, and obviously it's still affecting you. I'm sure there are many, many other incidents that you'd like to talk about in the remaining 30 minutes that we've got, or something like that. Would you like to expand a little bit further on other incidents?
Okay. The most difficult period of my time in my 45 years in the organization was my time in Bosnia. Now, you've been in Sarajevo, and I was in Bosnia in 1992, in the middle of in the Civil War. And I went out, basically I arrived out there and I was sent to Krajina, north of Croatia, and I was working with the EU as a monitor, non-military. I had a Mickey Mouse job up there, giving bread to old people, right? Talking to people, and that was it. And after about 3 weeks, I'm summoned down to Split, called in by the ambassador and General Cranston, the British general, and he said, we'll be monitoring your progress and we're going to send you with the EU back into Bosnia, EC as it was then, back into Bosnia, and you lead the mission. You know, and I mean, 1992, I mean, I wasn't young and I wasn't a fool, so I knew there was an angle here, you know. And of course, the angle was that the French and Germans were fighting, and British were fighting among themselves. Who's going to lead this back into Bosnia? And of course, what do? You pick the Irishman because he doesn't really fight with anybody. So anyway, so we did all our pre-ops, pre-training, pre-this, pre-that, and then we led in. So my first job out there really was to sort out my British. I had 3 deputies at that stage, 3, and one of them was a British guy who didn't like me, let it be known, and he was going to do his own thing. So anyway, I caught him fraternizing with people he shouldn't be fraternizing one night, and I got him sent home. And then the German guy decided that he would move out as well. So when that had settled down, and by the way, the British general was highly supportive of it. I thought he would get me out and keep the Brit, but he didn't. Anyway, so then we started to do our work. And I don't know what year you were there, Leo, but 92 in Bosnia was it was really horrendous. The war was everywhere. Some really outrageous stuff being committed, and you were witness to all this. Non-military, no weapons, and basically your notebook was your weapon. And I had some outstanding people. So I went through 7 months of that. I came home from my father. My father had remarried. My mother had died and he remarried. I came home for 2 weeks break, and I went home after 3 days because my wife said, go back there, get it out of your system and come home in May. So I arrived back and to be greeted by one of my people telling me, welcome back to the family, Mr. Lane. Because I cut off everything here. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to get back. So I got back, and even the pace quickened up, and I wasn't sleeping at night. I wasn't eating well. I was going 18 hours a day. And then I come home. And what happens next? Gay Byrne on the radio. My wife out at work, not talking to my kids. So for about the first 3 weeks, my wife should have thrown me out. Truly, she should have just said, take your bag and go. Which she didn't. She stuck by me. I went in to the military to see would there be a possibility of some support, and anyway, there wasn't. And that went on for a long period of time. And slowly the brain started to slow down, and I was doing a lot of running at the time, and that helped. And then one incident, a stupid little incident, changed my mindset. I was called in by my boss in the Curragh. I marched in front of him, and he looked at me and he said, Lane, you've been away somewhere for a few months. I said, yeah, I was in Bosnia. Well, okay, he said, I don't want to know about that. You're back here now and you've a lot of work to do here. You left here, he said, and you wrote me a report 8 months ago, and I've kept it on my table so that you would come back, and I want to go through it with you. I said, okay, sir. He said, the first thing is, Lane, I showed you how to tag a report before using a treasury clip. And I said, yes, sir. And you failed to do it. What do you remember about the instruction I gave you? And I said, I can't really remember. Okay, let's go through it again. So he takes my report, he gets a ruler, he goes 1 inch by 1 inch top left, and you hold it where the two lines meet. And you put your treasury tag in the following way. Watch what I'm doing, Captain. Now, do you understand that? I do, sir. Don't let it happen again. Now, out. So I salute him, left the office, got into my car, and started crying in the car. And as I drove back to the ammunition depot, I started smiling. And when I got out of the car, one of the guys on duty said, "Sir, are you okay?" I said, "I actually am, for the first time in a long time." Whatever that incident did to me triggered something inside me that said, "Ray, life is not all about what happened in Bosnia. The mundane is important also."
Ray,
So,
if I may,
yeah, sure.
sorry, Ray, if I may, that's I know where you're coming from on this. A question: do you think that your commanding officer at the time knew you had a problem, and this was his way to bring you back to reality?
No,
No,
no, I don't think so.
that's interesting. That's
No.
interesting. It was just his way of working.
Exactly. For example, a couple of years before that, I picked him up to bring him to a Christmas dinner. And
Yeah.
as we got to the door of the house, he said, "Oh, hold on, Ray, I need my joke book. I must select 3 jokes for tonight." So he
Oh, I see.
memorized.
Okay, right.
He memorized 3
right,
jokes.
right.
No, it wasn't. But the effect was,
Ray, yeah.
the effect
Sorry,
was,
Ray. Good. But look, sorry, we're jumping across each other. No, it's just that what you described there, the way you were suffering when you came back, but that incident seemed to kind of somehow clear the mind. Compared to other people that Marty and I know about, their minds never ever cleared right up until the day they died,
yeah.
and they were
I'm
sitting
a
down in
lucky
the
one, Leo.
yeah.
But if I may jump in, guys, just for a second, what Ray's talking about there, and if I can ask you a question, Ray, you were talking about like the guilt that you carried for other people, or you could have made a decision. How, and you spoke about your wife, how did it affect your family what you did?
Oh my God. I nearly destroyed the family, Marty.
Mm-hmm.
I nearly destroyed the family. I mean, my daughter still makes comments about that period of time. There were some big occasions in her life that I failed to show up at that time. I mean, I was angry. I was short. No love. No compassion. I was not a good person.
Yeah.
I was not a person you wanted to be around. That is for sure. Yeah. And you know, every now and then a comment will be made by my daughter in relation to that time. You know, and I mean, and I look at her and I say, I was wrong. I was wrong. But that doesn't reduce the damage that I did then.
No.
Or the hurt I caused. You know, I mean, no. And moving on then, just to, while I'm on that vein, I mean, the War Crimes Tribunal in The Hague then, you know, I'm in Afghanistan 2009, 2007, 8. The Department of Defense are hounding me in Afghanistan to get me into The Hague, right? The military have no hand actor part. Nothing from the military. So I'm out there in a busy job, you know, where we're losing, you know, we're losing so many people from improvised explosive devices. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And the pressure. And I'm getting these messages from the Department of Defense. You are due in The Hague the week after you come back from Afghanistan. You know? And then I get onto the military and I, you know, can you support me here? This is a departmental matter, Ray. This isn't a military matter. So I come home from Afghanistan and I head off to The Hague within 10 days to meet.
You're only one example of it, and that is moral injury. How many of those young soldiers and everything went through that as well? You're Leo, can I get you to come in there, please? You're sitting.
It's very hard.
You're listening. I can see your ears up. Listen to Ray, but get in here.
No. I mean, Ray, I could listen to this for hours and hours and hours because I don't have the same experiences. But I was post-conflict in Sarajevo and Kosovo, so I know what the people there went through. So, but you saw it firsthand. The obvious question is, Ray, how are you now? I mean, you're kind of emotional at the moment, and I know you're probably a very strong person. You have to be to survive all this thing. And you might as say, while I just think of it, I take my hat off to your good lady because she must be an even stronger person. She'll probably kill me for saying it, to be able to
She
put up with
listens.
you and stick with you, you
Yeah,
know.
no,
Yeah,
I know. She's listening to. I know she's listening to this. It's
yeah,
it. How am I now? Oh, I'm good, Leo. I mean, the book took an awful lot out of me.
yeah.
Okay, and I mean, I didn't want to write it, and anyway, the book took a lot out of me, and revisited things that are not in the book that I didn't want to revisit.
Yeah.
Okay, um,
Are we
and in the book,
upsetting you now? Are we
no,
upsetting
no,
you
I
now
know.
with this?
I'm just, yeah, there are things in my mind that incidents in my mind and people here now that I'm not talking about, but they're there, and I'm just aware of it.
Yes.
Um, um, oh, you know, I think the War Crimes Tribunal really was something for me that, I mean, I say like day one in the War Crimes Tribunal, I was attacked like I've never been attacked in my life. I mean, I was literally a machine gun was fired at me from 9 o'clock on Monday until 6 o'clock on Monday evening with this American legal wizard, right? $5,000 a day, right? And he's his homework done on me. And I hadn't got my homework done on me, Leo, because I'm only back from Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm.
And I was only given access to my reports 24 hours before the court case. And when I was reading through them, they had been tampered with by the court. So some of the comments I had made were not reflected accurately in the documentation, which I read, which was sent to the other side. So on Monday at 6 o'clock, my world in a way, everything that happened before really came to a head at 6 o'clock that particular day. Because I knew I had let the people of Bosnia down that day. I knew that my answers were imperfect, not good. I had failed to answer three significant questions. And behind me in the court, there's a glass wall, and behind that are people who come over from Bosnia to listen to your testimony, because these are the people who have lost loved ones and suffered. And I knew I hadn't done well. And Cavernis, who was their legal guy for these people, Michael Cavernis, jumped up and he said to the three-judge panel, he said, we must thank Mr. Lane for coming out of Afghanistan and coming here directly. Not an easy thing to do. However, that terrible word, but he failed to answer three significant questions here today. And really, judges, is there much of a point coming back tomorrow? And, I'm there thinking to myself, maybe I don't want to come back tomorrow and go through this again. And then I'm thinking, oh no, Ray, no, you can't. What about the people here, the people that are relying on you? So we waited and they discussed it in detail. And then finally, Judge Antonotti said, no, we'll resume tomorrow morning at normal time. So going back in the car to the hotel with a Defence Force legal officer, I'm still trying to work out why he was sent with me, but he said to me, Ray, if that was a soccer match, you lost it 7-0. And I said, thanks very much for your support. So I got back into the hotel. I got into my running gear. I went out and I ran. I'd say I ran a marathon and a half. I ran and ran and ran. And those three questions. And by the time I got back to the hotel at 3 a.m, I had the answers to those three questions. So I wrote them down and I went back into the court next morning. I looked at the judges and said, judges, I'd like to refer to Mr. Cavernis' three questions. He jumped up. I looked at him. I pointed the finger at him and I said, you sit down. So a big shot American legal guy, you sit down. And the judge said, take as long as you need. So that was it. We went right through to Friday. And Friday at 4 o'clock, it's over. And they have a little room there, and there's a doctor, psychiatrist. And this is the first time in my many years in areas like this that I actually finally get to meet a psychiatrist, right?
Yeah.
And he looks at me and he says, "How are you feeling, Mr. Lane?" And I said, yeah, not too bad. He says, "It's a tough time." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "But I'm grand." He says, "Are you sure you're grand?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure." And he said, "Can you explain then why you spilled your complete cup of coffee on your shoes?" And I looked down and my hands were shaking like they'd never shook before.
Oh.
It was unbelievable. And he said, "Just sit down there and relax." So I spent an hour with him. 1 hour, extremely well spent. Very, very important. And back to the hotel then.
And Ray, you
Oh.
you carry a few things you've said there, going from Rooney on to what you've done and your wife, everything. And I think it's part of Murray. You carry a lot of guilt, even though it's not
Yep.
your guilt to carry.
But it's not my guilt to carry, Marty. But there is such a thing as moral. You talk about moral injury, and there's moral courage, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I go right back to that famous day in Lebanon when I unfortunately accepted the verdict of my battalion commander on my report.
Mm.
That was I should have stood up and be counted that day, and I didn't.
Well, I think you're an amazing man and everything, but Leo, I'm going to let you jump back in, and we've got about 10 minutes left on the show, guys.
Just something pops up there from listening to you. You have a completely different scenario to the ones that we've been talking about, with Jadaville, etc. Yet this common trend goes right through. And there's a few things that pop up into my mind. We often refer to the double whammy. The double whammy. First, the incident that you had to put up with, like the Jadaville fellas had to put up with. That's the first wham. And then the betrayal was a second whammy. When they thought they were doing the right thing and nobody would support them, and that added to the moral injury, or added to the effect on the person.
Yes, the effect.
And then you talk about moral injury and moral courage. We are a little bit hot under the collar about all of this thing as well, because we have found, and not just us, but police forces in Dallas, Texas, and people in Australia and the Aborigines and so on. The common trend is that they end up dealing with people who are moral cowards. They just don't want to hear about it. And I presume that resonates with you as well.
Oh, yeah. Let me just move on a bit and give you an example of that. So from 2009 to 2018, when I retired, I was posted to the job I always wanted, which was in charge of the Ordnance School. And I was working with the European Defence Agency. I was chairing a UN board. I had served with NATO in Afghanistan. So I had the contacts all over the world. So I decided, I sat down one day to look at where the future threats were coming from in my area, improvised explosive devices and stuff like that. And I have a huge interest in biological chemical agents. That's why I work in University in Galway with Professor Yoshi. So I put a concept together, a vision paper, I call it. I got permission, unbelievably, from the military to go to Europe and see, could I sell it? So I sold it to NATO, and it was financed, believe it or not, by Luxembourg. So we ran a number of courses in the Ordnance School, 43 international countries, right, coming to the Ordnance School to deal with what we call the marauding terrorist attack concept. This is before Charlie Hebdo now. So a marauding terrorist, a guy who wants to kill as many using a knife, a gun, a bomb, whatever, chemical, whatever. And we did scenarios throughout the Curragh. It was a great success. I invited the Chief of Staff to open this course. He arrived down at the Ordnance School. I'm waiting for him at the steps. It takes him a while to get out of the car. He gets out of the car and he says to me, "You come over here." And he calls me over. And he puts his finger into my chest and he says, I told you there was to be no publicity for this course. And he shows me the Irish Times. And I looked at him and I said, and? He said, I told you. Are you presuming that I gave that to the Irish Times, are you? And he said, well, who else would do it? Well, I said, I didn't do it, so you need to find out. And I said, I object strenuously to the fact you putting your finger in my chest like this. And I also find it amazing that a chief of staff of an organization who's coming to address 43 international countries would get upset about a stupid little article in the Irish Times, as opposed to the course that's in there and the people and the reputation for your organization that's being built here.
Moral cowardice.
Totally. So I left them there. I didn't let him address the court. So he's standing there. His car had gone, his driver had gone to get coffee, and he's left there with the GOC waiting for his car to come back. Moral cowardice of the highest order. And I will not put up with it. And at that stage of my life, remember, I was the oldest person in the whole organization, in the whole of the military. And I think that, gives you a certain right
Yes.
to speak to people like that. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a thing, Ray, I mean, you're a good bit younger than I am, etc., but there's a transgenerational effect of moral injury, particularly as we know in the Jadwal community, where it goes down and affects the children. You mentioned about one of your daughters refers every now and again. I'm just raising the red flag about the transgenerational effect, because we know it's gone down to the grandchildren.
My God.
In the Jadwal families, where they don't talk to each other. Grandchildren of Jadwal veterans don't talk to each other. Children of Jadwal veterans don't talk to each other because of the trauma the families suffered as a result of a man coming back with what we now know to be moral injury as part of his psyche. So I'm just throwing that in as
it goes back, Leo, to silence. They keep it because it's transgenerational, and I can speak on that behalf. It's transgeneration because you went through what your parents did, but it does carry on down along the line. But listen, guys, we're going to have to wrap the show up. So, Ray, I'd like to ask you, for people that's listening to this, and then I'm going to finish off with Leo to finish it off. But you spoke there about like your wife, your family, and what you did is amazing. But then to be able to keep that inside, like you have to go home every night, you have to think about that. And I believe with moral injury that you're protecting your family, but not telling them everything.
Absolutely.
So you have to live with that. So can you give some people that listen to this all over the world, and I know this in an army context, but as Leo said, this is not, it's police, it's medical, it goes into the corporate sector. So can you give some advice for me, please?
Yeah. Speak, tell it, talk about it, and be honest. And if you need help, get it. And these organizations you refer to, these first responder organizations and similar, they have a responsibility for their people to make sure they're looked after. I mean,
duty of care.
Duty of care, totally. I mean, the military did not look after me. They did not look after the Jadwal people. They maybe they are looking after people now. I'm not so sure. I'm actually not so sure. But just one comment I'll make from an organizational point of view, just be honest.
Be honest with it. And just if I can just chuck in before I pass over to Leo, is you said there as we're talking, about your family and everything, is it's not just duty of care you spend a lot of time obviously away from home doing everything. It's duty of care to the families, whether the wife, the partner, and also the children, which Leo said earlier, and it goes down to the grandchildren.
Yeah. I mean, I have some experience of the British Army, having served in it, having been on a course, and I brought my family with me to on that particular course. And the difference between the way they look after their families over there and the way we don't look after our families, it's it's amazing.
Like, and Rick, if I can just, before I just, sorry, I'm always last minute. Leo knows what I'm like. He never shuts up. He says that, not me. But you were speaking on life stories with myself in Australia, and because I grew up on the Curragh camp, I'd like to throw that in there where you said where you've got a college you do teaching on the Curragh camp. Is we should all stick together and try. I'd love to see the Curragh camp back up to the way it was, and they shouldn't let that go. And that's a duty of care again for the people that live there, and God loves some of the soldiers that live there. But anyway, that's
just on that, Marty, just on that point, and just I did mention to you on the last podcast we did together that I bussed in all those students from those countries. So we put them up outside. We put them up in Newbridge and Naas. I would not put them up in the Curragh, and we bust them in and out of the Curragh every day because I did not want them to see what was around them in the Curragh.
Yeah. And yet that was a beautiful place for us, as I said on that podcast. But Leo, I'm going to let you finish off the show because, guys, we got to wrap it up. I'm sorry, we're running out of time. I know we could go on for hours, especially me.
Yes. Okay. Thanks, Marty. Yes, we could go on for hours. Ray, you're a very interesting man. You've suffered a lot. You've survived a lot. You are a survivor. You're very articulate. You're an intelligent man. You obviously have got a great family and a great wife. And I hope you're listening there, Mrs. Lane. And paying you a compliment because I know what it has to be. I know what my mum went through when Dad came home from Jadaville, etc. So there's not an awful lot for me to say, Ray, except thank you very, very much. It's been a privilege to hear you speak. There's an awful lot more you can say, I'm sure, but the very fact of the way you ended it, to say, speak out, and that's the message. And really, just to finalize what we're trying to do with Moral Injury International, we're not experts in it. We're just trying to raise the awareness of moral injury in all walks of life. And what you've told us today raises us to an even higher level. And for that, we thank you very, very much.
No.
And can I say to your wife, the same as I said to Leo, I know, I know she'll be listening, what they have to tolerate with you people. Like when they talk about medals, when they talk about medals, I am telling you one thing, the wives should get the medals before the men. They work harder at it. They have to tolerate.
My wife will agree with you.
My wife will agree with you. Look, but guys, thank you so much. And thank you for our listeners all over the world and here in Australia.
I think Ray wanted to say one last thing there. Ray was saying something there.
Yeah, I mean, I value an opportunity like this because you mentioned earlier on, Marty, about silence, and I know exactly what you're talking about. I just feel that if people are organizations and people try and be honest and say it as it is, if it isn't right and something went wrong with devastating consequences, tell it. We learn the lessons and we move on. But we have to learn lessons. We cannot keep reinventing the wheel.
Don't be silent, Ray. Speak to your family, to your friends. And you know what? More importantly, a lot of people do is just come back is speak to your wife. Don't keep them in because you know what? We've spoken to other people. They actually know what's going on.
Yeah.
And I'll finish it off. Men are stupid. Women are more intelligent. So there you go. Your wives are going to be happy with this podcast.
No, I just heard, Marty, I just heard a big yes from the kitchen there.
Tell her I know I've got 3 ex-wives, and the reason I get on with them is because I do what they tell me. But Ray, it's been a pleasure, honestly, and you're very honest, man. I hope you'll come back on the show and be part of the moral injury thing. And Leo, as always, you're the main man here on it. Love you guys and thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thanks, Marty. Thanks, Ray.
Look after
Okay, and if
yourselves.
you want to
Bye.
watch all our shows, please go to moralinjuryinternational.com. You can watch Ray's on life stories also, which was his life story. So thank you so much. Good night from Australia and good morning to you guys.